Okay, who's first?
Test. Who wants to go first?
So, if you're an average company that has some sort of business process and you don't know how to create that initial contract, but you have an existing business process that you want to bring onto the blockchain, um, is it the Oracle's responsibility to go and find the data sources and bring them online onto the blockchain so that the contract could be created, or is it the industry as a whole or that individual business's responsibility to find the data and bring it to a form factor that can be made into a contract?
That's a good question. In the case of Rhombus, our philosophy is to not be prescriptive about what data sources you choose to use. So ideally, a client will know how to transfer their business process onto smart contracts, and they'd ideally also know what data sources to use. Presumably, they've been using those data sources, and they simply need those Web2 APIs represented on chain in some way. So ideally, they wouldn't have to change anything about the data sources that they use. They would simply request that we deploy our own smart contracts on chain to sort of act as the middleware between their current APIs and their new smart contracts. And in the case that they don't, then we're happy to go out and sort of do some due diligence and recommend some solutions. That's sort of a consultative thing that we've had to do simply because people are new to the blockchain world. But once people are comfortable writing contracts and maybe even blockchain becomes the standard for that business, then they'll have gotten used to this process and that consultative angle might go away. It's sort of just the bridge towards creating a vision that we have, and it might just be necessary for some time.
I think he answered the question. So, as he mentioned, like it's up to it's not up to the business as well, but it's like if you can create those smart contracts by your data points and things, it's totally fine. But it's very difficult in this scenario, like the real world conditions. So, it's like Oracle's kind of needed for these kind of scenarios, and it's not needed for all the kind of applications, but it's based on the use cases and preferences, like what you want. So it depends on both sides. But it will be like resolved in the future, like as it's the starting point of the thing. So if it goes far, like it's smart contracts building will be get more issues than that, than how it was now. So it will be solved in the future.
When you build the oracles, when you design the oracles, how do you know that is basically give the maximum security for the scenario?
Sorry, how do I know that it's what?
It gives the security or the trust or whatever you call it. It's going to give it. So is there verification or how the process?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think the premise that we started out with is if we are going to open up blockchains to outside data, then it's a non-zero risk for sure. But that's the trade-off that we get for becoming more useful. Now to sort of mitigate that risk, I think Sharmilan did a good job explaining about some options that you have. One is to have multiple data sources, in which case if one gets corrupted, then it sort of becomes an outlier, and you have a computational process to sort of make sure that that outlier doesn't have too much influence. And then at sort of a higher level, you can commission multiple oracles from different companies to do the same thing and all send their metric to your contract, in which case if you notice an outlier at that level, you can also throw it out. Sharman also, went through, actually you can go through the other ones.
So it's again similar like you can take it as a mining process. So when you take it as a mining, how the miners work better. So it's what I mentioned, the skin on the game. So you need to ask them to, like, one of the options is like you can go for multiple data sources, or you can kind of consensus based oracles, so you can get multiple oracles comes together, and as oracle they agreed on one of the things. Or else simplest thing was like you can ask them to put a data as oracle, but ask them to locate the money as well. So when there's a money is locating, people don't make much of bad things because you're spending some of your money. So you can use your money, and if they're doing good, you can incentivize. That is one of the best option we have in the blockchain. So we have the money tied up with that. So we can use cryptocurrencies in a useful way that we can ask them to penalize, or we can ask them to incentivize. So that is one of the options.
And then
Okay,
like one final one that I mentioned that doesn't exist yet, but we're hoping to do is have risk neutral feeds, in which case you're buying data and insurance for that data at the same time. And currently there are a few companies that are trying to develop this. One is called Nexus Mutual. And what they do is they have a two-step process for essentially setting a premium price for a data source on chain. One thing that they do is algorithmic. They look at the amount of time that a data feed has been on chain, and try to mention the error rate, or measure the error rate. And the other that they have is basically a human audit. And both these processes combine to set a price on basically the risk of that data getting corrupted. So when you buy that data, you also buy insurance for the data. And if you end up getting the wrong information sent, then you get paid out for that issue.
so if you don't design this thing correctly, the oracles or whatever the interfaces, so there's a risk of that the whole the blockchain, the components, basically the structure is going to get basically it's you can't trust it, where a situation can come to that level. And also the designing part of this oracles or whatever the interface, if you don't design it correctly, and so let's say multiple feeds, we are getting multiple feeds from different locations, but still you have not addressed the problem because there's no standard way of defining oracles right now. So there's a risk. I'm just to point out there's a risk, and because of that risk, the whole chain is going to get sometimes the value of the whole chain might get lost at one point of time.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. But I think that we basically have implicitly assumed that blockchain will invent the perfect solution. But the problem is that data sources themselves are currently centralized, and in fact, they can be corrupted at the source. It remains to be seen like where the fault will lie if things go wrong. Right, this is a hot topic in blockchain, not just for oracles, but also for smart contract developers. If unexpected execution happens, who is at fault, and like, is there actually any liability? So it's actually an open question.
For blockchain, I mean, if you think about a banking system, if you don't do it right, I mean, you would have all these risks, right? I mean, if you don't walk right, I mean, if you don't cross the road right, you're on a risk. So I don't think it's isolated or like, only a specific question for blockchain or the decentralized ledger. Thing is, people are new. Like, all the developers are still new to the system, so the chances of doing mistakes is quite high, right? So that's how I see it basically.
And to add more one thing, like even if you're doing that kind of a risk, as he mentioned, like it can happen in any scenarios. So even if it happens in a centralized scenario, you have no way to track it back. But if it happens in the blockchain scenario, there's a way to track it back. So who did the bad thing? Which of the oracles do the bad thing? So you can track it back, and you can even penalize them, or you can, full of that, you can throw them out. So that possible you have in the blockchain scenarios.
blockchain, the slowness, right? The transaction processing is a bit slow in terms of when you have a lot of transactions and it's getting bulky. So this is something outside this. So how is the hash graph positions in with the blockchain in that context?
You mean the tangled ones?
There's a technology called hash graph, which
Yeah.
is similar to blockchain, which is
Yeah.
also based on trust.
So that is similar to Tangle, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. So, so it's kind of, it's not called as blockchains, but it comes under the distributed ledger technologies. So it's still on progress. So it's not in the level of what where the blockchain was, like Ethereum or Stellar, but it's still on the progress. But we can see it only when it comes to the practical scenarios, and like if you take it as a Ethereum or something like. And to add to your answer, like answer your question, like you're mentioning about the time scenario, so it's only happening in Ethereum. So Ethereum and like Bitcoins take so long times. So if it comes as a change like Stellar or Ripple kind of a thing, so it takes very less time, like 3 to 5 seconds the transition happens. So it's about like you need to compromise. There's no silver bullet kind of a blockchain that will provide like high security, fully decentralized and full fast transaction. So you need to compromise one of the scenarios based on your use case. But hash graphs and things like we can't see any practical applications goes there. So once it comes only, we know that how the efficient it works with the blockchain.
To that, I'll just add that we talked about network effects in terms of users, but for blockchain development, there's also network effects in terms of developers themselves. It's a really new technology, and a developer right now has many options on like, which do I want to learn first, and one of the factors is who's already developing, on Ethereum, right, or Stellar. Like, they have a incentive to sort of go towards where there's more education available and more testing happening with more users. So I think that we'll have to find a way to sort of allow incumbent technologies to be like tried and tested without like too much influence of just what's already being, popular. Like, just there has to be a way to give, say, Hashgraph a fair shake. But I think it's difficult now because there's so many competing blockchains in the space.
So my question is probably perfectly in sync with the previous one, which is if we have a multi-winner outcome at the end where multiple chains have reached critical mass, would there be cross-chain oracles, or would there be sort of dominant players for each chain, and how is that evolving with the view that's in the marketplace right now? Like, as in the existing players in the oracle space, are they going to be cross-chain, or are they going to really be dominant in one or more chains?
Yeah, there are already cross-chain oracles for certain use cases. One of them being, say, currency swaps. Let's say if you want to transfer Ethereum in one account. Sorry, so there are two users, A and B. A wants to send B Ethereum, and B wants to send A Bitcoin. So both users have wallets on both chains. In that case, you would have an oracle that would basically watch money in an escrow account in Ethereum and also set up a block explorer on Bitcoin. And it knows the two addresses on each chain to watch out for. In that case, that's effectively a cross-chain oracle. In the general case, it's hard to say, what the ecosystem will look like and whether it's worth developing like really heavily integrated cross-chain oracles. And there are some companies out there like Orbs that make the argument that every application deserves its own blockchain. They've like made the argument that basically we went from in the early days of the internet, everyone standing up their own infrastructure in-house, having racks of servers. Then we went to sort of shared servers, and then we went to everyone having infrastructure as a service with servers that don't interfere with individual applications' performance. But now, adopting blockchain, we've almost gone backwards in some cases because now we have applications that affect each other's performance. I think CryptoKitties is the dominant example there, in which case it brought down every other application. So Orbs argues that every application should have a dedicated blockchain, and what baseline protocol that is, whether it's Ethereum or Stellar, is still to be determined. But then of course you run into issues of like how many node operators can you get for each private chain and so forth. So I think the question you asked like starts begging a ton of different questions, and I think cross-chain oracles will definitely play a role, but just at what level of integration, I can't say yet.
Actually, my question is just to get an understanding of Rhombus. Is it a kind of APIs, or is it a collection of smart contracts that we can use for our smart contracts? So, what was it really? I mean, is it a company that does all sort of Oracle? I mean, all the kind of oracles. For example, like Shamlian mentioned that people can be also a type of oracle. So, in such cases where we need human interventions, what kind of support do we have? I mean, I just want to understand the company Rhombus.
Yeah, okay, good question. I think in Sharmlin's terminology, we are an inbound oracle. So I guess there's a dichotomy of the inbound and outbound oracles. Inbound oracles send information to smart contracts. Outbound oracles take information from smart contracts and send them out into the real world. In that division, we're inbound. But we can have our sources be APIs or proprietary data or even humans or IoT devices. We're agnostic in that sense. And the reason I say we can do all that is because we build custom oracles. So currently, it's not an API-like interface. If you are a developer or a company that is using smart contracts, then you would contact us and say, here's exactly what we need. And if you know the data sources, you could tell that to us too. And then we'd go and build an oracle to your spec. So in that case, it's a custom situation. Eventually, when we start to see more and more patterns emerge, we want to modularize those things and create more of an API-like interface. But at this point, it's just too early to say we want to be prescriptive and go in direction X or in direction Y.
You mentioned that you basically you deliver information through smart contracts, and sometimes you could directly deliver information to specific smart contracts. So at that point, how exactly you get the would you be kind of authorized as an information provider from an address point of view? I mean, how exactly you are authorized to send data to a particular contract? I mean, on the other hand, could anyone else also send data to that smart contract, or is it only Rhombus could really send that data?
Are you asking about public chains or private chains? Or
Say
both?
public chain, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So I think the most convenient delivery method is sort of deploying our own contract that will be periodically updated as needed at the frequency directed by the client. In that case, we basically have an update function that we can call from our node that can't be accessed. It's not a public function. Yeah. The public function is the one that basically, on the other side, the client can call to access the data.
Say that again, the public function?
The contract's public function is what allows the client to read the metric that we have sent in.
All right, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess to expound on your question, that is a sort of contract delivery method. You also asked about the direct delivery method. Yeah. So I think that's more appropriate for sort of sensitive data, because essentially if you create a Lighthouse contract and keep it on chain. It's not easy to discover because there are tons of contracts, but because these are not encrypted, by design it's a public blockchain. You don't want to expose sensitive data on a public chain on a lighthouse contract, which is why we developed the direct delivery method as well. Yeah, and we actually have. So Kaleido is basically a competitor to Hyperledger.
Okay.
And they allow anyone to spin up a private chain. And this is actually Ethereum based. So the private chain is run using Ethereum protocol, but it's not associated with the public Ethereum blockchain.
Ethereum also doing their own kind of private blockchain. It's not related to that one. No, this is that.
Yeah, it's not related to, doesn't have anything to do with the activity on the public Ethereum mainnet blockchain. It just uses the underlying technology to spin up a separate chain.
Okay.
And in that case, what we do when a customer wants an oracle is that we need to establish our own node on that private chain so that we can deploy contracts.
So it can be connected to the Hyperledger blockchain also?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. From that, okay.
Yep.
Questions? You guys got to have some questions. Yeah, no?
About the use of the blockchain, are there applications, are there any scenarios which really requires blockchain, or we can do it without blockchains? Certain ones we are trying to do with the blockchains. Can we do, let's say, basically public this thing, encryption, key encryption? We can do the authentication of the parties to some level. So
Sorry, we didn't hear the question, right?
Are blockchains necessary for any type of application?
Yeah.
You're asking if blockchains are necessary for any type of application,
Yeah.
right?
Blockchains are, so can't we basically, if you want to do it with blockchain, can you do without the blockchain? Maybe like if you want authentication, you can do with the public key cryptography. So the trust you can, so that there is a one way of basically ensuring the trust between two parties, maybe.
Yeah, I think that's a question that every developer should ask when they start any project. Blockchain is just another tool in the tool set. Another question you ask is, what language should I develop in? Do I need to have a microservice architecture prematurely, like, et cetera, et cetera? It's one of the many questions that I think you should ask when you start thinking about an application. I think it serves certain types of applications really well.
Are there any applications that's coming basically really as when you look at the cost of the blockchain, right? Cost of the blockchain. Are there any really good applications that you can basically take the use case as a blockchain for development?
So if I get your question correct, like you're asking like without blockchain you can do the same thing with a public and a private key. So I think you get the things complicated. So if you take as a public and private key, you can only do the encryptions and stuff. So that's not where the blockchain security comes. So blockchain security comes, the immutability and tamper proofs comes because it's chained together as the blocks, and you cannot go and remove some blocks from the middle. So that's where the security comes. And as well as the mining and all those things comes and add those securities. So if you have only a public and a private key, you can only do the encryptions. So you can do encryption and send to another person. So it's like you are sending a message or something like that, that you have the, if you want application, so it's same as WhatsApp. So when you're sending a message in WhatsApp, it's already encrypted using a key and it's sending to other person. So that's not where the blockchain comes. So when you take it as a blockchain, it comes only when the immutability and tracking of the records backwards from where it started from. So that's where the security of blockchain comes. And if you want to think like whether you want a blockchain or not, so that is a good question because it's not all the applications needed blockchain. So you need to first think about like whether you need any of the characteristics from blockchain you need for your application and use case, and then decide based on that. And if you're going to decide like more than whether you need a blockchain or not, you need a public blockchain or private blockchain, it comes next questions. And then if you go for public blockchain, there are varieties of public blockchains. So that's the questions like it come across like when you're going to do a blockchain based applications. But yeah, I hope I answered the questions.
I think the best example would be the Bitcoin, right? Before Bitcoin, you had to go through like, if you're transferring money from Sri Lanka to US, you'd have to go through like series of banks, series of central banks, series of regulatories. But, it has bypassed everything, right? It could, with the trust, with the confidence, you can transfer money from one person to the other. I don't think it would have been done without blockchain, obviously. So, for 200 years, it has been the authorities and regulatories who has been controlling fund transfers, but blockchain has made it a reality.
Yes, so adding to what he asked, right now, yeah, blockchain in terms of for cryptocurrencies, yeah, it works perfectly, right? That use case is something that is tested and well understood. But in other domains, right? For example, banking and healthcare, in that sense, right? Is there something blockchain brings to the equation that stands out from the traditional modes of us developing, maybe through APIs, standard REST APIs, or microservice through microservice deployments? So is there anything that apart from cryptocurrency that blockchain brings into the equation? Yeah, I understood that it has this thing that you can track the history and stuff like that, but then that could be done with a centralized kind of a deployment as well, right? So is there something that differentiates blockchain over is there a specific use case that apart from cryptocurrency that blockchain stars?
I think that in countries like Sri Lanka, you can actually find more applications for blockchain than maybe you can find in the West, and that the driver of development should come from communities like ours. I think one good example is, to my understanding, land ownership is a huge issue here. Like, it can be easily corrupted because it's a centralized record that a lot of private individuals have access to and can change quickly. I've heard of a lot of cases where someone just goes in and basically changes the ownership of some parcel of land to another person, and then people are stuck in courts for years, and sometimes it's resolved unfairly. And with blockchain, you have a public record where each change has to be authorized by multiple node operators. So I think that would severely decrease the likelihood of like land ownership changes that are, corrupt. So this is one example I could give, but I think Sharmilan went through some supply chain examples as well, where a lot of efficiency is gained.
So yeah, as you mentioned, like we have more use cases in Sri Lanka than the other countries because we are still stuck with more of the manual process. So one of the use cases that we are working on is a supply chain one called Tracified. So if you take it as a product supply chain, like you don't know if you go for we are recording everything in the records and even have the digital records. But if you go for a supermarket and buying apple, you don't know where it comes from, whether it's organic or not. It says even organic, but you don't know whether it's organic or not. So that part you can do it only through blockchain. Because if you're going for the centralized scenarios and you're storing the informations, even a system admin can go and change those informations. And in terms, you mentioned like the smart contracts that you can do it in a centralized scenario, that can possible. But the problem is that as a developer, I can go and change anytime I want the logic. But in a smart contract, once you lock the logic, it's locked. So you can't go and change those things. So that's where the needed of the blockchain comes. So if you have the vegetables and things in the supply chain, it's the record from farmer to end customer, we are recording everything there. So there's no way that no one can go and change the apples, or even no one can go and change the quantities of that. Maybe if you come for the previous meetup, we mentioned about the horse meat scenarios. So there happens in other countries, like they get as a beef burgers, but they sell as a horse meat burgers. So how it happens is like they get a 500 kilograms of beef and they added another 100 horse meats. So there's no way to identify it. But if you're going through kind of a traceable kind of a supply chain, what happens is like you have a blockchain-based assets. So you can only spend 500 kilograms per this month. So if you want to add some horse meats, there's no way to add it because you have only allocated 500 amounts. So and like oracles and stuff, like we'll do the lab testing and send, and those informations will come together. And as he mentioned, the land scenario, that there will be so many applications that we can do for vehicle registration scenarios, similar kind of things, and even birth, death certifications, we can do it through that. And whatever the things that you have, like you cannot trust anyone. So if it comes to the blockchain, like it's very less trust. So it's not about like 100% trustless, but there will be some trust parties there, but it's more secure than anything because if you do a birth certificate through blockchain and if you go and change something, in a centralized scenario, there's no way for us to track it back. But in a blockchain, we can go and see like who changed that one. So those kind of use cases we can apply through blockchain. And if you want practical applications, like one of the good applications are like you can go and check the Brave browser. So it's like a Google or something, the Firefox kind of a thing. So it's a Brave browser. You can go and check those things. So it's cut off ads and everything because it's going through blockchain. So you can set your privacy settings so it's not track your informations like how the Google tracks. So that you can do through kind of Mozilla, kind of Firefox, and you can compare to Brave. And it's like it's all those are practical implementations, and it's like if you go for the applications, you can find like similar kind of FB kind of a social media in a blockchain. So like a Medium, we have it in a Steemit. So we have the Steemit based blockchain-based blocking applications. So instead of a centralized Medium one, we have the Steemit. And we have even for WhatsApp kind of thing, you can find the Telegram. So those kind of things like practical, and people are using those applications through blockchains. So hope I answered the questions.
Yeah, so here what we're trying to do is when you make it decentralized, right? So on a commercial perspective, in a money-making perspective, is there a avenue that we could now say, for example, land ownership, right? So everything is stored everywhere, wherever the blockchain is stored, right? So we have all the things listed there, but then in terms of commercially implementing something or to gain monetary gain out of whatever that we develop, is there a mechanism that is?
So I'm not sure about the land registry because it's going with the government process and stuff. So, but if you take it as a supply chain, we have incentivized methods. So we have coins that you can incentivize for the people so that they can earn it from there. And even if you're using these applications, like you will be pay some fees to record those information. So it's like, it's easy for you like than comparing as a money, you can compare as a cryptocurrencies because that you can easily plug with any blockchains. So any blockchain application, you can plug the cryptocurrencies. So then from that, you can design whatever method you want to get the incentivize. And if you create as a crypto token based things, like you have the money will be goes up and down like a cryptocurrency, so you can do those kind of things, and even you can raise money through ICOs and stuff, so initial coin offering. So you have so many ways to get the money in. So it's not like it's the money making technology, so there's no way that you can say like it's very difficult to get a money or something, but because it's the easiest way to make money.
I think there are sort of more simple applications that we can develop as proofs of concept before we get to things like land registry, which would definitely be world changing. A simple example is flight insurance. Like this is it's not a life or death situation like a hurricane. So let's say you have signed up, you've bought a ticket to go on a flight. If it's delayed by more than 2 hours, you want to be paid out because you bought flight insurance. In the traditional case, when you buy flight insurance, you have to file your own claim. It has to be verified by an insurer, and then you have a slow payout, right? But it's actually really easy to verify if a flight was delayed or not. That's like a binary 1 or 0 thing and flight APIs are some of the most accessible out there. So it's kind of a no-brainer for you to pay a premium. Money is held in escrow for you. If your flight is delayed, immediately a payout is triggered from the money in escrow to your private wallet address. And that's like, a really simple, you can connect the dots for how that application can exist on chain and make your life easier if you travel a lot. And so this proof of concept was actually done by a company called EtherRisk, which is building a decentralized insurance platform. And so I think it'll take like small steps like these before we get to some of the larger cases that we've talked about that will really improve everyone's day-to-day lives.
Even one of the, to at that point, like even if you take it as a simplest application, you can see the application that we going to do it in the dev place. So it's like a ticket booking. So you can get a ticket, you can verify it. So it's so simple to do it, but if you take it as a centralized node, there'll be so many issues like black tickets and stuff. But this is one of the easiest proof of concept than like going for the supply chain or even land registry, because you have so long to go there. But here it's like get a ticket and verify a ticket. So that's how easiest application you can start with and go from there.
So for those who wonder if blockchains can be only used for cryptocurrencies, there's an entire country which is running on blockchain called Estonia. So from the birth, they track the birth certificate, education, everything using the blockchain. So you can, if you want to enter into an institution or like schooling, you have to like there's a public key. You have like people tattooed in their hands, or like make it as a QR code. So you have to tap it and go in. So if we are about to visit Estonia, we can't do anything without those public keys and the blockchain public keys. So other than that, in UAE, they track the people's fundings, like tax the politicians spend on blockchain. So the real, the citizens can view what exactly the politicians spend. So that's a real use case. I wish we also have it in Sri Lanka. and yeah, those are like there are like applications already implemented which can be implemented using blockchain, which will like makes things easy. And there are scenarios which are not like we don't have any applications and which can be made using blockchains, which makes things easy, like in both ways.
Yeah, to add to that, it's not that blockchain can't be useful. It's like, will we let it be useful? It's the issues that you brought up are as much, or if not more, legal than they are technological. We have the capacity to implement that. It's like, will governments comply?
So I'm talking in terms of a developer, from a developer perspective, right now. Say, for example, when Android and Apple came in, right, the developers gain through the apps that they publish on the App Store, right? So you have ads there, you have monetization set up in that sense, right? So developers you have an active set of developers basically building apps just for earning, right? So is there in the blockchain environment, because I am new to blockchain, right? So is there in the blockchain environment where you could readily come in and start, maybe if you took when Android came in, every small app, you press a button, it makes a noise, that is an app, and then you earn money out of it, right? So is there something in that sense where a developer, a fresher, a new guy who doesn't know blockchain, he wants to come in, explore the kind of market, and then push in something where he could gain through the code that he wrote? Basically, that was my initial question. Like, yeah, in terms of implementation, yes, there's enough and more implementation, but what's the gain to the developer? Is there something small that we could start off where you could initially see advantages or benefits coming in, either monetarily or otherwise? Monetary is what I'm basically looking at.
Yeah, that's a good question. There are lots of decentralized marketplaces for certain types of products. I don't know of one where you can just launch apps yet and get paid out. Maybe you, Shamilin, I'll leave it up to you. But basically, if you are a somewhat capable blockchain developer, there are lots of people who want to hire because blockchain developers are in short supply. So the standard that would be applied to hiring a developer in another like language, say it's a Java or Python, would not be applied for someone who's like writing Solidity. I guaranteed that.
Yeah, still there's no application like Play Store, something like that. You can go and straight away deploy and earn from that. But as he mentioned, like if you know blockchain, if you can develop smart contracts, there's more ways to earn it. So then go and deploy a simple application. You can earn it in many ways than doing that. And even there are like Coinbases and stuff like for earning, you can earn money as well. So when you're learning something, they pay for you as well. So that's how they work. So it's like there are more ways to earn it than go and deploy a simple application like a app store or something like that.
If you could name some, it will be like.
Sorry. Yeah.
Just want to add, there's a, you can search for DApps marketplace. There's a Ethereum-based online app store. I'm not sure whether you can make money, but you can just publish apps on Ethereum. That is called DApp of the day, where you have thousands of apps in the marketplace. You can, like mobile apps, you can publish called DApps, right? In that is actually Ethereum-based apps, but still there's no monetary kind of way that we can do. But any investor, anyone interested, maybe look into and they might invest in your project. But there's a store like that. You can search it on Ethereum DApps, where they'll publish thousands of these apps based on Ethereum. Yeah.
Maybe it might answer his question, or it's my doubt actually. I think of blockchain's use cases. When it comes to making money, is let's say I'm creating some sort of an application. Let's say kind of a resume maker or something. Then it might have some features, right? So maybe to use some of those features, I can ask them to use my coin, and then I can maybe do an ICO kind of a thing just to for my project, and I can earn money with that. And also for the users, they need to use my coin to do whatever the activity in my application. If the usage increases, then maybe my coins demand will also increase, and also I get money for the ICOs. I might hold some coins, right, in the initial coin offering. So yeah, maybe yeah, I can create my own, or maybe using Ethereum, we can create tokens. Yeah.
It looks easy when you're talking about ICOs and raising funds,
Yeah.
but it's still a very difficult thing. So it's like you can't launch ICO today and raise some money in 3 months. So it's like years and years process. Like you need to do a proper marketing, and people need to trust you. So there'll be so many other things comes into play. But once you have a solid idea and once you have a solid process and progress on there, so once you launch ICO, so that's one of the easiest ways to raise money and get the funding than angel investors or any other things.
And another thing is, not in a developer perspective, but also, I think, as I remember, it's Nokia or something. I think they had a plan to let their users to sell their data. It's not for the developer. With blockchain, even a user can also earn money with their data. I think now. There is a project, I don't remember the project, it's something the W3C doing. I don't remember the name, something start with S. That's the bestest possible memory that I have on that one. But there are some use cases where we can sell our data to make money. And in the context of IoT devices, I think there is a startup, or not, I don't know whether they were a startup, but there's a company called Streamer. Their business is actually they are blockchain marketplace and data marketplace. What they do is now we have things like self-driving cars and all, right? What they do is we can't have a human in between for those kind of situations. Let's say in future machine can talk to another machine. For example, let's take the self-driving car, for example. Their use case is something like that. The example they given in their website is something like that. One self-driving car can sell its data to another self-driving car, and if the other self-driving car want to maybe the traffic data or something similar to that, they can purchase using this. This is another use case that I can come up with, just to give some.
Yeah, you mentioned the medical field. In the U.S., there's a company called CoverUs, which is working to allow users to sell their medical data and get compensated for it. This concept across the board is a great idea because your data is already being sold for free and you're not getting compensated. So at least you'll get to choose what you want to sell and you can get something out of it.
Last question for the day.
So about the airline, I think fire risk or something you were mentioning.
Hurricane thing?
Insurance.
Insurance. Yeah.
And so what is the case where if you do it without blockchain and if you don't do it without blockchain, what is the marginal cost? What is the marginal benefit?
Yeah. The
Business analysis.
the cost is that some people whose homes are damaged or totally destroyed by hurricanes, in the case that I put up, have not been paid out.
No, in terms of the business perspective on the developer side, not the user side.
I see. So, how much more will be charged for an instantaneous payout? That's the implication, right? Like, if you sell a better product, it's probably going to be more expensive because you're taking on more risk as an insurer, right? So that's a case where I think traditional insurance companies won't lead the way because they have a model that works, and insurance is a very traditional, slow-moving business. So disruptors have to come in and do things like what I mentioned for other people to see that there is a better business opportunity at stake here. I don't know how much more they're charging than the equivalent of an insurer who's just providing traditional hurricane insurance. But I do know that probably the best marketing for them is that people who are buying traditional insurance were not satisfied because they were not paid out. And with insurance, I think the smaller payouts, less extreme use cases will be adopted faster, like the flood insurance one that I mentioned, because the payout will be on the order of maybe $100, not thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands. So it's something that you might buy often and actually get paid out in your lifetime, and if it does or doesn't happen, it's not as much of a risk, for your livelihood. So I think people would be more likely to adopt that sort of use case first.